All right, guys. So on this video, we're going to talk about 3x2s. So 3x2 multiplication is going to be the highest, or I guess you could call it like the biggest numbers that you could expect in fifth grade, or the biggest types of problems that you might see in fifth grade. For example, we never do, like sometimes kids will ask me, like, do we do 3x3s in fifth grade or do we do 4x2s? It's not going to be very likely that you would see anything like that unless you're just maybe getting a little bit extra practice in. Sometimes I'll show my students, just for fun. But a 3x2 standard algorithm problem is what you guys should be having to achieve or having to do for, for your work. And so I'm going to start here. I'm actually going to show a couple of just practice problems with 2x2s. And so I'm just going to go back. And I know on the previous video we were looking at some 2x2s, but I think it just would be good practice for us to kind of go from 2x2s to 3x2s and really see the change. Okay, so starting here at 25 times 18. 25 times 18 is a 2x2. Again, when you're starting a 2x2, you have to think about a couple of things. One, you'd have to have a placeholder, or like I called on the last video, an egg. Something else that you'd have to think about on this maybe is the facts involved. And so on this one, I need to know my 8s, and I also have to know my 1s, which should be really easy. And so let's tackle this problem. Let's go back over 2x2s and let's kind of see how it changes. All right, so on this one, I'm going to start here in my 1's place. I'm going to go up from 8. 8 times 5 is 40, so I'm going to carry a 4 over. Write my 0 in. I'm going to stay with my 8, cross over. 8 times 2 is 16. 16 plus 4 is 20. And so the problem I just did was 25 times 8. Now, I don't expect my students to write this stuff off to the side, but it's sometimes good to think about. That's what I just accomplished. My next problem that I'm really going to go and accomplish or try to solve for is going to be 25 times 10. Because again, when you're doing a 2x2, you need to think about you're really breaking it apart. You're doing, basically a pretty easy problem at 25 times 8. 25 times 10 wouldn't be that bad, but if we're going to do it traditionally, like I'm about to show you, there's some things to kind of cut corners and make your life a little bit easier. So we're going to lay that egg. We're going to scratch. And then what I would want my students to see at this point is what I would call a shortcut. There's something quick and easy that's about to happen. And I would hope all students would be able to spot this. And that is, after I've laid an egg and I've scratched out, what I'm looking at is just 25 times 1. Well, in your math classes now for the last few years, you probably have talked about anything times 1 is itself. So 25 times 1 is 25. So I could just write 25 in underneath, and then now I'm ready for my addition problem to figure out the final answer to this. Now, I am going to show what it would be like if you did it step by step. So I'm going to change my color here, and I'm just going to think, okay, if this were a traditional problem, after I laid my egg here with the 0, I would start with the 1. I would retrace my steps. My next step would be 1 times 5, so that's where we got the 5. And then my next step would be 1 times 2, and so that's where we would get that 2 there. Now we just have to add it all up. And so once we, again, those are just little bitty tricks and things to see, but that kind of makes your life easy. In my opinion, if I'm sitting there and I'm seeing something times 1, I don't need to go step by step. It's just going to be whatever that number is. So this one was 25 times 1. We just can write 25 down there. And so I'm going to go back, put it all together now. I'm going to write the answer out here to the side so I have more room. 0 plus 0 is 0. 5 plus 0 is 5. 2 plus 2 is 4. And so here we don't have that big of an answer. You have 25 times 18. 25 times 18 ends up being 450. So just a couple reminders there with the 2x2. It's always good to see that for practice. All right, on this page, I'm going to transfer over to 3x2. So again, these are the ones that you're going to have to be facing in fifth grade, and really the biggest problems that you would have to face. Like a lot of times I always kind of ask my kids this in class, and it's kind of interesting to see who finally gets it. But if you think about it, sometimes I'll ask them, what's the biggest problem you might face as a 3x2? And so it takes them a little bit to think about it, but finally somebody usually gets it, and it would be 999 times 99. Because if you think about your digits, those would be your biggest digits you could have, and then for a 3x2, 999 times 99 might be the biggest problem you could see there. So having said that, this one's not that problem, but if you look at it, again, I would want to stop and think about what I'm about to do. So I'd have to know my 8s on this problem, and I'd have to know my 3s, because we're timesing it by 38. This looks a lot scarier, and a lot of times kids will lock up and freeze on me, and they think it's really difficult math. It's the same thing that you have done in 4th grade. It's just one extra step. And so a lot of times kids think this is really, really difficult when it's just a little bit more work. That's all it really is. This time, you could kind of see this potentially as you're just doing a couple of 3x1s is really what it's going to turn into. And we'll see that along the way. Okay, so let's start here in the ones place. I'm going to start with the 8. So 8 times 2, I'm just going to go straight up. 8 times 2 is 16, so I'm going to carry a 1. I'm going to go back to my 8, just like I would on a 2x2. I'm going to go across to my 10s. 8 times 8 is always a hard fact. I don't know why. 8 times 8 fell on the floor. If you pick it up, it's 64. I learned that in 2nd grade, and that has stayed with me all these years. Learn stuff like that. It helps you out. 8 times 8 is 64, plus 1 is 65. Here's the new part. So I just have one extra step. So I'm going to carry my 6 over. I'm going to write my 5 in, and now I'm just looking at one extra step. I'm going to go from my ones place now up to my hundreds place. So I'm going to go from my 8 to my 3. 8 times 3 is 24. 24 plus 6 is 30. And so now I just have to think about what that would look like. And sometimes kids lock up here. You don't have anywhere else to carry to. You've gone, basically to your hundreds place. So if I do 8 times 3 and get 24 plus an extra 6 is going to give me 30, then I'm just going to write 30 as part of my answer. And, breaking this apart, this is the problem that we just did. We just did 382 times 8. You just did it more in a traditional algorithm versus breaking it apart. And so at this point, you're kind of halfway done with your problem. You would still want to go back to what you learned as a 4th grader. When you're still, again, and your mindset is, even though it's a 3x2, it's something by 2. You have 2 digits underneath. And so I still have to think, well, I need a placeholder or an egg, as I've been calling it. I'm going to scratch. So this time I'm going to scratch the 8. I'm also going to scratch the 1. I'm also going to scratch the 6. And so I'm really kind of stepping back and looking at this problem now, and I could just see this. It's really just going to be 382 times 3, because that's what's left after I've scratched and I have my placeholder. So now, again, maybe one of the harder parts for kids is getting to this, and I'm going to circle this one, getting to this tens place and knowing what to do. Probably one of the most common mistakes that kids will make, and it's hard because you've been taught all these years to do it, is to go from that 3 and go straight up to that 8. When, if you remember, I talked about it previously, you want to retrace your steps. So if you retrace your steps, you're going to do everything with that 3 that you had already done with your 8. So if you go back, the first thing you did with your 8 was you went up to 8 times 2. Well, I want to go and I want to retrace my steps with my 3. This really needs to be my first step now. Once I get to this point in this problem and I've scratched and I've laid my egg, I want to treat it like if it were a 3x1 and I was doing this problem. It's just going to look a little bit different. And so if I retrace my steps, 3 times 2 gives me 6. So I'm just going to keep going here. My next step is going, all right, I want to go up now. 3 times 8 is 24. So I'm going to carry a 2 over here. My last step for multiplication would be 3 times 3, which gives me 9, plus an extra 2 gives me 11. And so I'm going to finish this off just like I would on a 2 by 2, and I just add it up. And so you're going to get a little bit bigger numbers here because you're dealing with bigger numbers. You're dealing with, something in the hundreds times something in the tens. A 3 by 2 is going to give you a bigger answer. And so you just have to go slow and make sure you add. I always tell my students, if you get to this part, you've done the hard math. Why miss it now? You're to the addition. This should be the easy part. And so I'm just going to write it out to the side. I would drop 6 there. 6 plus nothing is 6. 5 plus 6 gives me 11. So I'm going to carry over here. 4 plus 1 gives me 5. 3 plus 1 gives me 4. And then 1 and nothing gives me that 1. And so basically I'm just taking what I would have underneath. I'm writing out to the side. I'd put a comma in there where it's supposed to go. It looks like 382 times 38 gives me 14,516. And so looks hard. Kids think it's much harder, but man, I think if you really get 2 by 2s, this is pretty much the same thing with just a little bit extra. All right, we're going to try one more just for practice, just so you kind of have it in your notes there. Let's try 459 times, let's do 86. All right, let's see what we come up with here. All right, I'm going to go straight traditional here. Nothing really off to the side. I'm just going to go through this step by step and see what I come up with. Okay, so let's start here again. Maybe thinking before we do anything, I need to know my 8s, I need to know my 6s. So those are 2 facts that I have to have down. If I don't have those down, I'm in trouble. I'm really probably going to struggle on this, but if I have them down, this makes for a pretty easy problem. All right, let's start here in the ones. 9 times 6 is 54. So I'm going to carry. I'm going to go to my next step with that 5. 6 times 5 is 30, plus an extra 5 is 35. Okay, let's keep going. 6 times 4 is my next step, which is 24. 24 plus an extra 3 is 27. And so if I stop here and I think about it, all I've done is 459 times 6. 459 times 6, I have the answer there. That's not my final problem, so I have to keep going. So I'm to my placeholder now. So I'm going to put that egg there, that 0. I'm going to scratch. I don't need anything that I've carried so far. I don't need my 6 in my 1's place. And now I'm looking at my next problem. My next problem could essentially be 459 times 8. So I'm going to start with that 8, and I'm going to retrace my steps. I'm going to go back and do everything I just did with the 6. Now I'm just doing it with the 8. So if I go back here, 9 times 8 is 72. So I'm going to carry a 7 up top there. I'm going to go up now. 8 times 5 is 40, plus 7 is 47. Again, watch too. Another big issue with these is being nice and neat. Keep your place value lined up nice and neat. All right, so I carried there. I got 47. My last multiplication problem would be 8 times 4, which is 32. 32 plus 4 gives you 36. And so I'm going to now add all this up. It's going to give you a bigger number, but traditionally 3 by 2s can get a little bit bigger. 4 plus nothing is 4. 5 plus 2 is 7. 7 plus 7 is 14. 2 plus 1 is 3. 3 plus 6 is 9. And then there at the end, 3 and nothing is 3. So if I put a comma in there, looks like I have 39,474 as a final answer. And so looking at this and kind of wrapping up 3 by 2s here, again, in your mindset, you're doing the same thing as you did last year as 4th graders. You just have one extra step. You have a little bit more work. That's what I tell my students. It's just a little more work. It's really all it is. It's a process, though, and you have to get those steps down. A lot of times for kids, it starts off and the issues are facts. They have trouble with their math facts. And then they finally get those down, and then it turns into steps. Oh, I can't get the step. What was the first step? What was the second step? So it turns into where you just kind of have to make all of it gel together. And to get there, is really, it takes practice. I always tell my students, practice makes perfect. You have to practice. You cannot do one or two of these and expect to have it down. It's just the same thing in facts. You can't practice facts for 1 or 2 days and think you're going to have all your facts. You have to keep practicing. And so keep practicing, watch these videos, watch them over and over if you need help with your steps, and then you'll get it down and it'll become easy. But you have to do it. You can't, I always tell my students, you can't be lazy. You have to do it. So hopefully this video helps, and hopefully we can get down some 3x2s.